Welcome to the Aerospace Advantage podcast, brought to you by PenFit. I'm your host, Heather Lucky Penney. Here on the Aerospace Advantage, we speak with leaders in the DoD, industry, and other subject matter experts to explore the intersection of strategy, operational concepts, technology, and policy when it comes to air and space power. Earlier, we chatted with the commander of the 55th Electronic Combat Group, Colonel J.R. Smith. He and his airmen are charged with operating the Air Force's Compass Call electronic attack aircraft. And bottom line is, this is one of the lesser known, but crucially important mission areas inside the Air Force, because we live in a world where information is key. We always want to be able to communicate, enhance our decision-making ability with real-time data, and use various forms of information to yield enhanced outcomes. We need the electromagnetic spectrum to be effective in our way of war. I mean, think about it. That's basically what a smartphone does for us, and we're all glued to them. These same trends hold true in military operations. Understanding the operating environment and using that information to drive highly effective command and control is everything. And at a strategic level, it drives those big decisions. And at a tactical level, it's how a given system, like a combat aircraft, might close a kill chain. So it's not just about data links, it's also how we use our sensors. The key to success in 21st century warfare is how we maximize this information advantage while denying it to the adversary. And that's why it's so important to talk with Colonel Smith and learn more about the 55th. What he and his airmen do with Compass Call is hugely important in that effort because they provide precise, high-powered, long-range jamming that denies, degrades, and disrupts the adversary's ability to harness the electromagnetic spectrum. Take away China's situational awareness, and they will struggle to sustain effective combat operations. And as part of our conversation, we highlighted the Air Force is modernizing the Compass Call mission. It's moving from the legacy C-130-based systems to the new EA-37B, which will see next-generation mission equipment housed on board a Gulfstream G5. That's a huge step up, not only in terms of aerodynamic performance, think altitude, speed, endurance, but also in swap C, power, cooling. This is an incredible development, so we wanted to continue that conversation by talking with one of the companies involved in this effort, BAE. And as you know, you can't talk about much in the electromagnetic spectrum without running into BAE. Their folks are the dominant experts when it comes to this mission. So to help me with this discussion, we've got Mike Dahm joining me today. And as you all know, he's an expert on all things China, and he's got a huge depth of experience in the electromagnetic spectrum operations. So given that China's our pacing threat and they're hugely focused on information in the battle space, we need to factor that into the context for this conversation. So Dahm, as always, welcome.
Thanks, Heather. Happy to be here.
And we'd also like to welcome Dave Harrold and Duane Beaulieu from BAE. Dave is the Vice President and General Manager for Countermeasure and Electromagnetic Attack Solutions. And Duane is the Tech Director. So gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Thanks very much, Heather. We're glad to be here. Thank you, Heather. Really looking forward to this. Appreciate it.
Great to have you here because you know what? You guys are thinking about the forward edge of technology capability and what the threat will demand. So we appreciate your insights. But Dahm, I'm going to pivot to you because I want you to help us set the scene. It's no secret that the electromagnetic spectrum is going to be incredibly important for the Pacific fight. China has their informationized warfare and intelligentized warfare concept. In many ways, we're seeking to do the same to them. I mean, they learned from us, and so now we've got to be able to figure out how to counter that. Help us understand these concepts and why maintaining spectrum advantage is crucial.
Yeah, Heather. So this Chinese concept of informationized warfare, we've talked about it on the podcast before. Fundamentally, it's about battlespace information dominance. And I need to be clear, it's not about social media or disinformation. That's a strategic communications thing. But, you know, it's really what you see in the cockpit, what you see on the bridge of your ship, and what you see in your command center. So the electromagnetic spectrum is hugely important to Chinese informationized warfare. In my opinion, the EMS is really much, much more important than cyber capabilities, which seem to grab all the headlines. So why is spectrum advantage more important than some kind of advantage in cyberspace? Well, it's all about access, right? An F-35, especially one in flight, is not connected to the internet the way your bank account is connected to the internet. It's exceedingly difficult for a hacker to gain access to a closed-loop combat system. But where both we in the United States military and our adversaries do have access to these combat systems and how they sense and process information in the battle space is through the electromagnetic spectrum. So, realizing how important that access is, over 20 years ago now, China started building out significant electromagnetic spectrum operations and electronic warfare capabilities. They built on this long experience they had with concepts of Soviet radio electronic combat. And since 2005, the People's Liberation Army have been focused on training to operate in what they call a complex electromagnetic environment.
Okay, so complex electronic environment. What does that mean? And where does Compass Call fit into this electromagnetic spectrum context?
So the PLA thinks if they can dominate in the EMS and they can gain decision advantage in the battle space, they're going to win. So platforms like Compass Call are absolutely a necessity. Without that capability, we lose. Without that capability, we lose our ability to deter and lose the ability to fight and win. In a recent podcast, we took a broad look at China's military capabilities, and we agreed that we should probably temper the hype a little bit, right? The Chinese military is not 10 or 15 feet tall. But electronic warfare, I got to tell you, it is one of those areas where I think the Chinese are, no kidding, really, really tall. And of course, everything is relative. Even if they aren't 10 feet tall, the bigger problem is that, well...
How tall are we?
Yeah, we're really, really short when it comes to electronic warfare. You know, we've been hearing a lot about the Air Force and their investments and how the other services are building out these fantastic electronic warfare capabilities over the last several years, and that is awesome. But we have to come to grips with the fact that EW is a challenge that we had been ignoring since the end of the Cold War. So I don't have a single bad thing to say about Compass Call. My only criticism is we need more of it. We need more of those types of capabilities faster. But we absolutely need more capabilities like Compass Call to lead and coordinate the electromagnetic fight against a high-end adversary like the PLA.
So as you know, I'm a big fan of electronic warfare. Being able to dominate the electromagnetic spectrum is going to be crucial to any kind of combat operations we execute, whether or not that's going to be in the Pacific or anywhere else across the globe. Now, Dave, you've heard Daham's take. How do you explain this mission to folks? Like, how do you turn this into English for other people that are not within the community?
Right. Great question, Heather, and great comments by Mike. You know, our view is combat success against a peer nation adversary like China is going to be decided by our ability to use and control the electromagnetic spectrum when and where we need it, while denying the adversary their use of the spectrum. Encountering the A2AD threat really requires a combination of capabilities, including tactical capabilities on fighters and area affecting standoff jamming like you get from a Compass Call. You know, to enable other aircraft to execute their missions, we've got to provide persistent simultaneity, compute resources, and combat power, frankly. And that's what a standoff jammer brings to the fight. Compass Call is the Department of the Air Force's only dedicated long-range standoff electromagnetic warfare jamming platform. And that's, as Mike said, that's why it's so important. It's really about disrupting the enemy's command and control communications, radars, navigation systems. It's about restricting their battle space coordination, deny the red kill web and enable the blue kill web, if you will. Our goal is really to disintegrate the effectiveness of the enemy's integrated air defense systems and, frankly, all of their defense systems, and really to disrupt the exchange of information between those systems, break down their comms, and really make them alone and afraid. And that's why Compass Call is such a force multiplier.
I really liked so much of what you said there regarding persistence, simultaneity, the combat power, really being able to coordinate electromagnetic effects across the battle space to really crush the enemy's ability to do that kind of coordination, to share the data, to close their kill webs, and all of that. But let's go into the Wayback Machine. And Duane, the Air Force has had Compass Call since the early 1980s. What did the mission look like back then, and how has it evolved? I mean, it really was a different era in the 1980s. For example, phones were bolted to walls and they had long cords, and the World Wide Web hadn't even been invented. So what was it then, and how has it evolved?
Well, BA Systems has been the mission system provider since 1981. Mission system, or the weapon system, Compass Call, has been used by the Air Force in every major engagement over the last 40 years. As the mission system prime contractor, we lead the systems engineering, we lead the integration, we lead the testing elements of it. And as you have indicated, Compass Call was originally designed to negate the adversary command and control systems. And in the Cold War era, that was Russia. During the 80s, we saw the Russian proliferation of those systems. Fast forward into the 90s. 90s, we saw a pivot from the conventional warfare to irregular warfare. With the pivot to the irregular warfare, we saw an expanded target set. That expanded target set included a lot of commercial communication systems. And so you start to see this evolution of the threat through the years. As we head into the future, we know that that target set's going to continue to expand, especially as the complexity of the systems in the adversary's IADS increases. As Mike had pointed out, right, the tactical networks, the information ecosystems, those are all expanding. BAE Systems has delivered multiple hardware and software upgrades, advanced capabilities since 1981.
It's interesting, Duane, how you mentioned that Compass Call had evolved to address commercial systems, right? Doing that with irregular warfare. And that's, I realize, not something we have to leave behind or can really afford to leave behind, not only because we need to remain postured to address these kinds of irregular threats, but we might also see that kind of usage on the battle space against state actors. Just imagine what's going on within Ukraine and Russia. So the ability to address those systems, information systems and electronic systems, both at the state level, which we think of as traditional military capabilities, as well as more commercial type capabilities that adversaries might use as a way to try to sidestep what we bring to the fight, will be important. So having that hybrid combined capability will be, I think, crucial to anything we do in the future. So Dave, I would like for you to talk to us about the nature of information, right? We highlighted with Colonel Smith things like mission data files, and that was pretty static. It was updated on an annual or even a monthly basis. And for our audience, at a wave top level, the mission data file is our documented understanding of the enemy systems. We have to know and be able to identify and characterize who's in the battle space so that we know how to be able to counter them. Once we figure out their signatures, we can drive towards those certain solutions paths, like I said, once we identify them. But today, we need to be far more dynamic and far more responsive. I mean, like, time matters here. So, Dave, again, can you help us understand that progression and where we are today with the speed of adaptation and information?
Yeah, really, you hit the nail on the head around information. It's key to everything we're doing here. I mean, we say here quite frequently that speed is life. And whether that's in the acquisition system or the ability to reprogram very rapidly, that's what we're focused on. Rapid capability insertion enabled by a software-defined radio architecture, open systems design, and really with an ecosystem for third-party developers is an example of what we're trying to do to face into this dynamic, everything has to be fast kind of environment. We understand that these complex emitters, the threats from the adversary, they're always changing. There are unknown variables, and we're focused on accelerating the updates to the mission systems. Again, whether that's through how we acquire those updates or whether it's through how we communicate and leverage those updates, we're really focused on that rapid acquisition and rapid reprogramming.
I've got a question. This is Mike. I'm wondering, like, what do you think the role of AI is, maybe now or in the future, in terms of anticipating adaptation instead of just reacting to changes in the EMS, maybe anticipating changes in the EMS?
Yeah, Mike, great question. I mean, we are exploring that for sure, both artificial intelligence and machine learning and how we can integrate those in our future offerings, because we want to go from the way that Heather described mission data files, for instance, or even reprogramming as we do it today, to near real-time information sharing. And the only way we're going to do that is to leverage those emerging tools. And so, you know, as a company and as an industry, we're all continuing to explore what it would take to leverage those capabilities, because frankly, as you know, Mike, the adversary is doing that in a big way.
Yeah, and if I can build on Dave's response, you know,
Absolutely.
we look at what's needed going forward, and being able to certainly put our warfighter back into not a reactionary state, but a proactionary state. And I believe that's where the AI and the ML pieces are going to come into play. And as Dave stated, creating that rapid capability insertion environment, laying the infrastructure in place to allow rapid updates, not only of specific target capabilities, but also some of these ML algorithms. That's going to be key going forward. And so, want to just make sure that we've got everything in place that gives our warfighter advantages going forward.
Time is going to be the new offset. I mean, I really think that time and the cycle time for the response is going to be crucial to maintaining the advantage, because we no longer own technology, right? I mean, technology is proliferated, and as well as software and hacking and things like that. So we need to be faster than the other guy. So, Duane, again, as we're seeking to understand the Compass Call mission and how it's evolved, were there some key thresholds of capability development and mission demands that then sort of brings us to the present day?
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked earlier about the mission and how it's evolved over the decades. The threat environment's very different. You see the complexity of, the commercial systems finding their way into, what we have to deal with. And the pace of change is just quickening. Adversaries, have increased their complexity within their systems. And those increased complexity just drove our processing capabilities and waveform generation capabilities. We need to be able to negate these targets, as you had indicated earlier, very rapidly. We need to shorten up these decision timelines on blue and really take away any of the red decision timelines. So today's near-peer nations, I mean, they've got a lot of complex capabilities with their kill chains, their kill webs, dynamic, C5, ISRT, the command, the control, the communications, cyber combat systems, the ISR, the targeting. They're very sophisticated networks. They've got them through their emitters, they've got them through their distributed networks. And that's something that evolves, and we need to have the ability to simultaneously take out multiple nodes effectively. And so with that, we drive to capacity, we drive to simultaneity, we drive to increased compute resources. And so there's a number of things that have taken place that have really driven the evolution of where we were back in the early 80s through the 90s into going forward.
I'm really excited to talk more and unwrap more what you mean by the simultaneity and the capabilities that Compass Call can bring to the future fight, the EA-37B. So, Mike, I'd like to pivot to you again before we dive deeper into that conversation of capability, because I'd like to learn about your evolution. I mean, you're a big, big believer in electronic warfare and being able to counter our adversaries across the electromagnetic spectrum. What got you there?
Yeah, so story time, right? I was there for what I call the reboot of the Air Force's renewed interest in electronic warfare. And so in my mind, it started with 6 unsuspecting F-15Cs from Elmendorf Air Force Base that flew out to India for an exercise called COPE India 2004.
I remember that.
Yes, suffice it to say, it did not go well for the F-15s. So I can't go into all the details about what went wrong for Team USA, but it is not an exaggeration to say that the Indian Su-30s, and I am not kidding, MiG-21s, actually wiped the floor with our F-15s. And one of the things that surprised our guys was an Israeli self-protect jammer on the Indian aircraft called the ELL-8222. So fast forward about 18 months, I arrive at PACOM, at the PACOM Intelligence Center in 2006 from my Navy Air Wing Intel job. And they're like, hey, after this COPE India thing, we're thinking we might have some challenges in electronic warfare. So let's have the new guy look into that. So I started digging into Chinese electronic warfare capabilities, all access, classified, everything, right? And not just self-protect stand-in jammers like their KG-300. But, also standoff jammers, ground-based jammers, UAVs with EW capabilities, and these dense, complex networks of frequency-diverse radars and communications networks. And, the list goes on and on. So I began to realize we didn't just have challenges with older fighter radars and new-generation self-protect jammers. The Chinese were creating challenges across the electromagnetic spectrum, both offensively and defensively. And it was a huge level of effort. And that was almost 20 years ago, right? So what have we been doing? Back in April of this year, I appeared before a congressional committee and I testified that the PLA is an electronic warfare juggernaut. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. So I'll just read from the transcript of the hearing.
And by the way, can we put the transcript in the notes, show notes?
We can put the transcript in
Fabulous.
the show notes. The PLA possesses both the technological capabilities and significant electronic warfare capacities to conduct decisive offensive and defensive electromagnetic spectrum operations that will enable, if not ensure, initial PLA information dominance in a counterintervention operation. So platforms like Compass Call, all these electronic warfare capabilities that we're talking about, it is about seizing that initiative back from the PLA and getting back into the fight.
And not only do we need the capabilities, but I will just say we need to have the opportunity to train with these capabilities. And that means having not only some open air opportunities for people to actually experience what it's like in the vehicles, but definitely a lot more in the simulation, because we can't do much of what we want to do with electronic warfare in the open air, but we need to ensure that our warfighters have experience not only with what it's like to be attacked by China, but also how to employ their capabilities and synchronize their operations with Compass Call.
PenFed checking and savings accounts are here for all your adventures. From
Do you take this man to be your husband?
I do.
to
He has your eyes.
He's perfect.
learn more at penfed.org. Federally insured by NCUA.
So, Dave, when an airman steps on an EC-130 today's Compass Call, what generation of technology are we looking at? I'm guessing the intense use in Afghanistan and Iraq saw it modernized, but it was really focused on that irregular element of the spectrum, not what we'll need when we look at pure fights that are now our main concern.
Yeah, I think obviously since Compass Call got put into play in the early 80s, we've delivered lots of hardware, software, firmware upgrades over the years to advance capabilities. You talk about the intense use in Afghanistan and Iraq. Well, one of the things that I think that taught us as a company, at least, is that the pace continues to quicken around emerging threats, and you have to be ready, and you have to invest, and you have to understand what it takes to try to stay ahead of those emerging threats. Obviously, the system's retained relevancy over the years and will do so for decades to come. I mean, the whole purpose of the cross deck was to take what was on the EC-130 baseline and bring it to the G550, which is the aircraft that the EA-37B is based on. And that, providing improvement in survivability, primarily through speed and altitude and endurance advantages, and really helping the warfighters maintain mission readiness. But we're continuing to be on that modernization journey, and the baselines that are on the cross deck today are actively being replaced by more advanced baselines in the coming years. And we're upgrading those capabilities through that baseline capability upgrade process. Fundamentally, we are moving to a software-defined radio architecture, which will really be the critical enabler to bring in all these rapid, different kinds of apps and skills from a variety of different sources and integrate them into the architecture.
So Dahm had mentioned that China has this family of EW systems. It's a suite, it's a menu of electronic warfare capabilities.
A Chinese menu of electronic warfare capabilities.
I was going to go there, but I just didn't. It was too easy. So what I'd like to do is ask you about this broader collaborative mission execution, because if you have a variety of different capabilities hosted on different aircraft and different platforms, whether or not that's space, air, sea, land, we need to be able to battle manage those. They have to be able to work together, synchronize, have that sort of simultaneity, figure out how to get a force multiplier of effects based off of where they are within the battle space and where the adversary is in the battle space. But now, thanks to real-time connectivity, advanced processing power, when we bring these systems together, they're far more capable than just the sum of the individual parts. We live in a world where Compass Call employs with fifth generation aircraft, and we've got the space systems, and we've got electronic aircraft dedicated like the EA-18 Growlers and F-16 CJs. Can you talk to us about that ecosystem, how you bring them together, how they play together, and how you do that EW battle management?
Sure. You've got a great point. We often say around here, there is no one silver bullet. It is a layered and collaborative approach that's going to get us there. You mentioned quite a number of the different platforms and vectors. The EA-37B is going to be a critical part of the electromagnetic ecosystem. They're going to have a key role in electromagnetic battle management in the future. And why do I say that, and how do we have that perspective? So let me give you a little bit of background around BAE Systems in the EW environment. Of course, we provide a lot of multimodal electronic warfare capabilities. Our EW technologies on more than 120 platforms, operating on 80% of the U.S. military fixed-wing aircraft. Why does that matter? That matters because it gives us somewhat of a unique perspective of the electronic warfare ecosystem, and therefore what kind of role an EA-37B might play there. You mentioned a few platforms. We also have delivered on platforms including the F-15, the F-22, the F-35, the U-2, and a variety of classified platforms. So we sort of understand how this all can play together to get you that better outcome that you've described, Heather. And so we're really trying to focus on a deep understanding of that ecosystem. And because of this unique perspective and experience, we've got the people and the experience and the investment that we think we need to help regain that competitive advantage in the EW environment. And so, like we said, EA-37B mission system is critically important. It's a force multiplier, and it's complementary to other EW systems that are out there. Again, there's no silver bullet, and it's going to take a layered collaborative approach.
And so as we take what Dave said and kind of look forward, we have a lot of exquisite capabilities that we bring to the table. And these are the individual platforms. And working to the strength of each of the individual platforms certainly gets to a point where you have a system that is greater than the sum of the parts. Taking the collaboration, the coordination to the next level, and assuring that you are able to execute missions based on timelines where you are looking at not only geographic, not only spectral, not only time, but power as well. And it's kind of looking at things multifaceted, multifactored, and being able to take the strength of all those systems and bring it to bear. And again, as Dave said, there's no silver bullet. Each one of those systems, it's a node on the net, and it's every platform brings something to the game.
Yeah, I think it's really unique. I mean, what you said about each platform bringing something unique, because the system that they have, the aperture that they have, the antenna that they have, the software that they have, and the power that they're able to generate, as well as where they are physically in the battle space, is going to have a huge impact on their signal to noise ratio, the axis and azimuth that they are attacking the adversary, to be able to create those openings. And so I really think that one of the things that EA-37B brings to the fight is that ability to understand and knit and be the connective tissue for all of these things. And again, foot stomping. We have got to be able to get the warfighter into training using the electromagnetic spectrum. So it's not just all about kinetics. We need to understand how crucial the non-kinetic element of EW can be. So we talk a lot about the allies and partners, and you're clearly involved with all of them through efforts like F-35 and other programs. And I know you cannot speak for the U.S. services, but from an industry perspective, how should we ensure a broad collaboration at that operational level, at the execution level? I mean, we need to ensure that we've got electromagnetic spectrum interoperability, real time, but a lot of this is very classified, and so we don't necessarily always play as well together as we should. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we all know that a key part of the national defense strategy is about having strong allies and having coalition partners and having the ability for mission systems to interoperate. And, we continue to work with the Air Force and various combatant commanders to figure out, is there an opportunity to export some of this capability in some way, shape, or form, so that they can be leveraged by our allies and partners, so that we can expand that capability in the areas of operations that are most important to our national security. Interestingly enough, the open architecture approach that we've got with the A37B is actually an enabler for that because it allows for capability insertion. It enables third parties to create those relevant applications that may be applicable to one platform over the other. And, some good news on that front. Obviously, we're working in Indo-PACOM and other areas, but earlier this month, the State Department made the determination to approve possible foreign military sale to the government of Italy for this electronic attack mission system based on the EA-37B. So we're very excited about that, working closely with the U.S. Air Force on that and looking at other potential allies and partners in Indo-PACOM as well to figure out how to enhance that collaborative approach.
Well, congratulations on that. As JDAM had said earlier, we can't get EA-37B to the fleet fast enough or in enough numbers. So the ability to expand these capabilities, your systems through FMS and through our partners, is an important element of having more available to any coalition operation. And as well, that interoperability and integration isn't just about export, it's also our ability to, as you mentioned, adapt the EA-37B and its systems to systems that our allies and partners might have right now, but may not necessarily be sharing with us. So that kind of two-way resiliency and adaptation is crucial. Duane, I'm curious about the factors that drove the requirement for a new Compass Call aircraft and all of the mission systems. I mean, we know anyone who's heard General Kelly talk about the airplane can't miss the sense of urgency in his remarks. Again, I go back to JDAM saying more, faster. Why is this so important right now?
The importance really comes from the operational requirements, being able to get to that Pacific fight faster at higher altitudes with longer endurances, making sure that we can stay on station and execute and support the missions as needed. That was one of the key factors. The other key factor really had to do with the increasing complexity of our peer engagement, the simultaneity that we had talked about earlier, being able to hit those multiple elements within that web simultaneously and effectively. So you bring in a number of key elements, and then looking at what General Kelly had said, the 37B is the Air Force's only dedicated EA platform. That is significant. And so again, as we go forward, we want to make sure that we are doing the right thing for the warfighters.
Yeah, Heather, if I can build on that, I mean, the EA-37B was originally designated as the EC-37B until late last year when ACC decided to redesignate it. And that's not just an administrative change. It's really significant in the fact that it's the electronic attack, the EA, that is in support of what Duane has said about General Kelly's remarks and the focus of this platform as an electronic attack designated platform.
And the broader system itself, as you mentioned, the speed, the altitude, the range, and frankly, the SWAP-C. SWAP-C is a physical attribute of the engines and the associated systems that really the EC-130 can no longer provide, given the geographies and the demand that we'll face both within the Pacific and elsewhere around the world. So a whole new system is utterly necessary. But JDAM, we know it's not just about the Chinese menu. We also have seen Russian nesting dolls. Do you like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Russia's been playing aggressively in the electromagnetic spectrum as well in Ukraine. So how does that shape the demand signal?
Well, I got to tell you, frankly, I don't know that it shapes the demand signal a whole lot at all. Russian electronic warfare has excellent public relations. And I think going into Ukraine in 2022, Russian electronic warfare was going to kill everybody on the battlefield. And then it didn't. But yeah, Russia's use of electronic warfare has brought attention to the challenges of the electromagnetic spectrum, if nothing else. And right now, we know reports indicate that the Russian side and the Ukrainian side are basically denying everybody use of the spectrum. And that's largely why the conflict has devolved into trench warfare with artillery duels. So the demand signal in Ukraine on both sides is for more really dumb but really reliable 155 millimeter artillery rounds, because the fancy GPS-guided or GLONASS-guided precision weapons simply aren't working in that jamming environment. But here's the thing. For as bad as people may think the threat of Russian electronic warfare may be, it is going to be nothing compared to what we're facing in China. I have a colleague in the intelligence community who makes the comparison. What the Russians are doing in Ukraine is basically high school level electronic warfare. The electronic warfare game that China is bringing is college level, even graduate level EW capabilities, including both electronic attack and frequency diverse radar and comm systems. But more than that, the Chinese have much more capacity than the Russians, and they can distribute electronic warfare or electromagnetic spectrum operations effects across a really large area.
Well, I would say not only is it just simply that they're jamming each other, I would say also from an air power perspective, they don't have and they are not employing air power in the same way that we would employ it. And so it would be interesting to see how their use of spectrum warfare would impact a Western operation. But bottom line, if it's just high school, we should have the ability to address that as opposed to the challenge that China would show us given the sophistication and the maturity of their systems.
Yeah, we're going to need platforms like the EA-37B, frankly, to fight our way back into the spectrum once China kicks something off.
So, Dave, we know most things tied to the EA-37 are classified, but the fact that it flies higher and faster than the EC-130 is pretty obvious, and we spoke to this earlier, but can you go more deeply into why this matters?
Sure. I mean, I think we did address part of the answer here a little bit earlier in that we need something that's much more survivable. We've got the tyranny of distance issue in PACOM, and making sure that we can make this platform as survivable as possible is critical. And the speed, altitude, and endurance enhancements certainly play into that. By the way, it's not just about the survivability of the EA-37B platform. This platform enhances survivability of every other platform that's in the ecosystem through its capabilities to deny and degrade and disrupt. I think the other important thing that we talked a little bit about, though, is as we move to a much more open architecture, software-defined radio, that's going to enable that rapid reprogramming, bringing in new skills and applications that can counter the emerging threats where the pace is continuing to increase. And I think that, we do believe that we need more EA-37Bs out there, whether that's domestically or through our coalition partners. And we need to continue to explore what it might look like to bring a scaled or distributed electronic attack capability to the ecosystem as well.
Scaled and distributed electronic attack. I'd love to dig into that more. But Duane, we talked about sort of the physical attributes that the EA-37 brings. Like, for example, altitude gives you a longer look, right? The speed of the aircraft is both time and range. Endurance is about range and persistence, as well as the SWaP-C gives you the power necessary. But what were some of the other challenges that you faced in terms of a threat perspective?
So when you look at the threats, right, the increasing complexity of the threats, the increased signaling protocols that require all this additional compute resources, and the rate and pace at which they're changing, that really drove us to a architecture that enabled us to provide rapid updates very quickly. So rapid updates very quickly, but have that rapid capability insertion environment. And by that, it's not just the advanced capabilities, it's also some of the hardware capabilities. And so with the advanced capabilities, as you look at the EMSO warfare elements, right, it's not just taking out red, but it's also preserving maneuverability space for blue. And so it's a combination of those two things. So everything, the answer to everything is not just power, but it's power relegated to when, where, time, geography it's needed. And those are some of the challenges that we took. And quite frankly, I think our team did very well in executing.
So, JDAM, why is this mission becoming more complex? I mean, clearly we've got a lot of different platforms, a lot of different systems and capabilities that's covering more of the spectrum. So it seems intuitively obvious. But what insight can you provide us?
Yeah, so I think the mission is becoming more complex for a couple of reasons. First is that the EW systems themselves, as we've been talking about, they've become more complex, right? It wasn't that long ago, certainly within my career, where we were facing single frequency, crystal controlled radars, and everyone relied on big noise jammers that just pumped out a lot of interference.
Cease buzzer.
That's right. But over the past several years, we've seen a rapid evolution in the sophistication of electronic systems with complex waveforms that can adapt in real time to victim signals to deliver effects that range from jamming to deception. But the other thing that we've talked about, and we keep coming back to this, is this increased complexity of the systems of systems. Not only are the individual systems becoming more complex, but these systems are being integrated into a broader system of systems where effects can be synchronized and compounded across a broad area of the battle space, not just on our side, but also on their side. So if China's developing a complex system of systems for electromagnetic spectrum operations, the U.S. is developing the same kind of systems, you pit those against each other, you move them through time and space, and then you add a healthy dose of atmospheric effects.
Of course.
And, your head's about to explode, right? I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a computer model that could play that out. And those types of computing capabilities, you've already alluded to it, we need virtual spaces in which we can test out the big show, right?
Yeah.
All of these frequencies operating against each other, operating against victim signals. And, I'd be interested to know more about how we're creating those live virtual constructive environments.
Well, and what else I'd really like to see is I would really like to see OT&E across all the services. Maybe this is a department-wide thing. Be able to take electronic attack and electronic warfare and put that through operational analysis and operational research. Because I don't think that we've actually got the computer modeling done to understand exactly how well these systems create an enhanced survivability for blue forces, as well as understand how they can dismantle red forces. And so having that kind of testing and that kind of operational research and analysis, I think will be crucial to proving out the investment and the value of the investment. Because any warfighter will tell you, I need more EW. But being able to get the budget to follow because you have hit the I believe button, that can be more of a challenge.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that things like modeling and simulation, operational analysis, and really understanding how the mission synchronization happens at the campaign level is critically important, as is training of the crews. And it's got to be a comprehensive approach to all of this, because not only is it important in winning budget battles, it's just important in making sure that everybody involved in the campaign understands the combat power that can be enabled through the EA-37B and all the capabilities it brings. Heather, you bring up a great point that from a training perspective, it's really hard to turn on all the lights and really fully enable the system during training. And we've got to find virtual ways to enhance that training to make sure that we are growing that understanding of what the platform is capable of and how it plays such a significant role in the electromagnetic operations ecosystem.
And Dave, kind of building on some of that, once we get our models in place, we get the OA in place, that's going to form a foundation to do the training. Once you get that into place, that's in fact going to feed back into the TTPs that are executed. So there's a whole lot of effort that could be stood up there. I know we're starting to work with the different parts of the Air Force with some of that OA modeling, being able to gin up some of the more detailed models of how the systems work, how you get that simultaneity, where do things start to fall apart with respect to compute resources and throughputs and those kinds of things. But all of this is something that we as a company are leading forward into because we feel very strongly this is what's needed going forward.
I'm really glad that you brought up the notion of tactics, techniques, and procedures, because until we really understand how electronic warfare is going to affect the electromagnetic spectrum, we can't really figure out how to optimize the placement of different capabilities of airplanes, of the timing, the synchronization, the battle management of the broader force, as well as the spectrum management piece. Right now, I'm not going to say we're guessing, but we're not playing as informed or as precisely as we could until we've done a lot of that computer modeling. Basically, our ability to understand how electronic warfare is going to shape the battle space could fundamentally change how we operate our kinetic capabilities. So, Duane, we've talked a lot about rapid capability. What more do you want to add regarding how this has shaped the way you've approached EA-37B?
So our work with the Air Force on the 37B and the open architecture is definitely paving the way for our standards work with an ultimate goal of ensuring that our warfighters have the latest capabilities and technologies. In May of 2022, we announced a successful flight testing of 3 third-party applications using a software-defined radio suite that we had developed in conjunction with or in collaboration with the Air Force. That was a key demonstrator of our ability to accelerate rapid capability insertion. So you take those couple of things and, we continue to work with the open architecture standards organizations, ensuring concepts of dynamic control of apertures, multiple targets simultaneously, being able to deliver those persistent effects that you had talked about, enabling our warfighters freedom of maneuver, right? That's kind of a key thing as well. And the complexity of the systems, one of the things I want to kind of point out is just the resilience within not only our systems, but their systems as well. And so it moves away from a 1v1, a 1v few, and you're on a 1v, kind of a many v many. And back to one of our earlier conversation elements where it's all these exquisite capabilities that are in that forward battle space, bringing what they have to bear to execute this mission, to increase the probability of success of that mission.
Can you conceptually sort of describe for warfighters that are not as familiar with how to use electronic warfare, electronic protection, how you could potentially open up a space to enable us to use our blue capabilities? So, for example, I'm an F-16 pilot. I'm flying around my F-16. I want to be able to use my radar, but I'm getting jammed by the adversary. How do we ensure that our countermeasures that are coming off board create an open and clear space for me to have a good radar picture? Or are we just goobering up the airspace in a different way?
Yeah, so it's not just goobering up the airspace in a different way. It's really a deliberate approach to understanding, okay, so you've got, a red 2 ship on blue 2 ship, red 4 ship on blue 4 ship. You're trying to understand and take away some of their communications, not only from behind them, but from within them. Being able to take those away and really just take away their ability to react to what they see in the battle space. So once we're able to do that, and we're talking, operating at the left-hand side of the kill web, the kill chain, being able to take out some of those things, that conceivably opens up some space in which now blue has freedom to operate and maneuver within the spectrum.
Yeah, Heather, if I can add to that, I think the approach of EA-37B is one that's very surgical and not the use of a sledgehammer when it comes to jamming in the EW ecosystem. And I think that also brings the simultaneity capabilities to the forefront, and why that's so important is we can do a variety of surgical capabilities, apply them to the ecosystem in just the right time and space so as not to make a mess of the electromagnetic spectrum and limit our blue capabilities.
I'd like to talk about the implications of the adversary's threat systems. We've talked a little bit about A2 and AD, but I'm really frustrated that some folks have this perception that once you trespass inside the red line, you instantly vaporize. We do have to respect the notion that non-stealth aircraft will have to stand off a little bit further. I mean, that's real, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they can't go inside either. How is this impacting Compass Call, and how do you partner with stealth aircraft who can penetrate more deeply? I mean, the aperture on the F-35 and B-21 is pretty powerful, and we hope that the NGAD would be operating the same way. But to think that we have to stand out super far, I think really doesn't do us a service in terms of being able to win the fight.
No, it really does not do us a good service. And again, this is where some of that operational analysis comes into play. The EA-37B, absolutely more survivable because of a lot of the advanced capabilities that it has on the platform that it brings to bear. We talked about the power levels that it brings. We talked about the surgical capabilities that it brings, both temporal and spatial. So you have those pieces working with it. And again, it's partnering with some of those platforms that you mentioned, collaborating with, ensuring overall mission success, enabling those platforms to get deeper into where they need to get to. And this builds off of, again, the OA analysis coupled with a lot of those LFEs that have been executed over the past little bit of time.
So I'm really excited to hear that you guys are actually engaging with large force exercises and seeing how people are responding and employing electronic warfare. And this brings in the human element. We've talked about the need to train with these systems, but I'm really curious how you deliberately designed the EA-37B for the human warfighter. I mean, we've got to honor things that work, but also we can't be trapped into doing things because that's how we've always done them. What did that look like for the EA-37 from a challenges and opportunities perspective?
Yeah, certainly that went into our thinking. I mean, the original cross-deck approach was to bring EC-130H capability into a different package, different swap on the EA-37B. But it couldn't just be a straight cross-deck. We had to take into account things like a different crew size, right? We're reducing the number of crew, increased crew workload. And so what are the human factors that had to go into everything from the person-machine interface to the ergonomics of the seats in the aircraft and how everything played together? It's about a technology refresh of a different kind, which is really allowing the operators to do more faster. And with the compute resources and improvements in the resource managers there on the platform, we've further enabled that capability. So, things like modern approaches to the user experience, like the number of mouse clicks it takes to, have an effect, they were a core part of the design thinking. And, because like we talked about earlier, the concept of operations or the TTPs will have to change through this cross-deck and this enhanced capability.
So, Dahm, clearly EA-37B is going to be far more effective, but we can't fall into the trap of thinking that more effectiveness means we can have less of them, especially when we're looking at how large the Pacific AOR is. So we'll likely need EA-37B in other places as well, given concurrent demand signals. So more, faster, but do you want to add anything to that?
Well, electromagnetic spectrum operations and electronic warfare are governed by the laws of physics, right? It's not magic like cyber where I can just write an incantation in my code. The reality is that sometimes, you just need more power. You can do clever things with waveforms and deceptive signals, but sometimes it's just going to come down to signal power to jamming power and, projecting that power over a given distance. So Ukraine is the second largest country in Europe. We were talking a little bit about Ukraine, but that battle space is nothing compared to the size of potential Asian battle space. And so do I think 10 compass calls are enough? No. If it were up to me, I'd suggest maybe doubling or even tripling the inventory. But, with the Air Force's current struggles with force structures, I don't think they're going to be willing to pay that bill. More importantly, I don't know that we could actually grow the electronic warfare talent in a crew for all of those aircraft. But this is the same challenge that we've talked about on this podcast about penetrating bombers. A large bomber that can penetrate air defenses and deliver a huge payload of weapons is awesome. But that aircraft cannot be everywhere all at once in China at the same time.
Amen.
It cannot service multiple targets simultaneously across that huge battle space. So I think the same solutions apply here, and we've already talked about it here in the podcast, right? The EA-37B needs to be integrated as a central component of a larger network system of systems in which lots of platforms, the F-35, UAVs, Navy E-18 Growlers, they're all integrated to deliver effects in a coordinated way across the battle space.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up the crew, too, because we talked about this a little bit with Colonel Smith, is the need to be able to protect and then grow the human capital and the human talent that'll be crucial to the real adaptation, the real speed, and the real employment and advantage that this platform can offer. It's not just about the capabilities and the technology. It's often just as much about the people that are available there to employ them with the wisdom, experience, and human cognition necessary to be able to achieve an asymmetric advantage. So I've got a question for all of you. We often hear folks talk about how we need to transition more missions to space, and we see that in areas, for example, ISR, GMTI, ground moving target indicators, so forth, and electronic warfare may be going that way. And Mitchell's view is that we should focus on both domains, air and space, because a singular domain projects too much vulnerability, it simplifies the adversary's calculus, and it takes away any sort of resiliency, any sort of plan B. So we also know, though, that things in space can be targeted as well. So I'd really like to hear your perspective on electronic warfare from space.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and kick us off. So, obviously I'm biased toward the Mitchell view. It's dangerous to put all your eggs in one basket, especially when you're dealing with an adaptable and rapidly changing adversary like China. So, take Starlink satellites, for example, right? The challenges that Russia has faced in Ukraine with Starlink, apparently they can't jam it, they can't geolocate the ground terminals, so maybe Starlink's going to save us all. But in the next 5 years, China will also have its own Starlink-like satellite constellation. And these constellations, they may have some inherent electronic protection capabilities, but they're not invulnerable. And in the cycle of capability and countermeasure development, at some point, that Starlink technology is going to become vulnerable. It's inevitable, right? So we can field capabilities faster in the air domain, and we need to be able to deliver effects and reconstitute capabilities in the air domain to ensure dominance in the information domain. We can't put everything in space. We need to be able to leverage that airborne layer.
Concur with everything that Mike had said. Single domain approach is not robust. It's not comprehensive enough. And even considering looking beyond air and space at other domains, you use the example of Starlink, and that's just a lot of repetitive, resilient emitters, and we're going to need something very similar across a lot of domains to tackle that kind of system.
Yeah, I agree with that everything is going multi-domain, and we can't just rely on one single area of operations. We continue to see a lot of capabilities move from the air domain to the space domain and other domains, as Duane points out. Our approach at BAE Systems is to figure out how to deliver a layered platform survivability approach that creates almost a sort of virtual protective sphere around these platforms in highly contested battle spaces. Again, there's no one single approach that's going to work. It's about combining full spectrum electromagnetic energy capabilities to detect and exploit and defeat some of these advanced threats from all different domains.
Okay, so I have a question for y'all. What does winning look like? And this isn't just like when we get to say, hey, we're done, yay, yay, victory. It's really also about understanding when our effects are actually being effective. So how do we measure when we've crushed the adversary? How do we know that the spectrum is clear? How do we know that it's go time for more traditional assets? I mean, we've talked a lot about resiliency, adaptation, synchronizing, having a network of electronic warfare capabilities. How do we know when it's working?
Heather, that's a great question. And I guess where my mind instantly goes is back to sort of the national defense strategy, which really drives a lot of what we do. And if I go there, my answer is winning is deterrence. Making sure that we don't actually go to war and have a kinetic damaging evolution, that's about deterring the fight as best we can. And not going to war is victory. And frankly, dominance in the electromagnetic spectrum leads to that deterrence. And for me, that's winning.
Yeah, and I'll chime in there that, if you understand China's informationized warfare strategy, they think they need battlespace information dominance to win, full stop. So if you want to deter the Chinese, you have to attack their strategy. Their strategy is to dominate in the EMS. Their strategy is to have better battlespace awareness. And if they have that, they think they win. If we can show up with capabilities like Compass Call, with all of these other electronic warfare capabilities we're building out, we can threaten that dominance in the electromagnetic spectrum, and they will pause before they kick off a large-scale operation.
Anyone else want to add to that?
No, I concur with the deterrence, concur with creating the fog of war, absolutely preventing everything from escalating to a kinetic element is really what winning means to me as well.
Would either of you like to speak regarding the schedule for EA-37, regarding what milestones we should be tracking?
Yeah, so we're currently on contract to deliver 10 aircraft. We're working with our Air Force customer, industry partners to do that. As an industry team, we are looking for the opportunity to accelerate those deliveries because we know how important that is.
Well, gentlemen, thank you. It's been great having you here today to chat about electronic warfare and the EMS, and especially the EA-37B and what it's going to be able to bring to the fight. It's such an important mission, and we really appreciate, again, you making the time to make it more understandable for folks. As I've said before, we are a huge fan, and we'll love to continue the conversation and host you again. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you, Heather. We really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation and explore what the future looks like in the electromagnetic spectrum.
Thank you, Heather, for the opportunity and for those thought-provoking questions.
With that, I'd like to extend a big thank you to our guests for joining in today's discussion. I'd also like to extend a big thank you to you, our listeners, for your continued support and for tuning into today's show. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to hit that like button and follow or subscribe to the Aerospace Advantage. You can also leave a comment to let us know what you think about our show or areas you would like us to explore further. As always, you can join in on the conversation by following the Mitchell Institute on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and you can always find us at mitchellaerospacepower.org. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great aerospace power kind of day. See you next time. So I got this question. We talk about software-defined radios all the time, but the physical attributes of the antenna are really important as well as the hardware components that create the waveforms. So how really adaptable are software-defined radios? Like what are their limitations? I mean, are they defined to a specific bandwidth? How does that work?
Yeah, so our objective really is to make sure that those software-defined radios have a very broad operational frequency coverage. When we put together the sensors, the receivers, the transmitters, receive pass, transmit pass, our objective is to provide a very broad frequency coverage with a high dynamic range. If we can achieve those couple of things within this software-defined radio, whether it's a receiver looking at one channel, whether it's a receiver, muxing, multiple channels together to, get like a DF cut or something a little bit more, spatially targeted, we know that we're going to achieve what we need to achieve. And similarly, on the waveform generation side, being able to, build out some of those transmit elements so that we are replicating the physical layer of some of those signals to the maximum extent practical.
Well, I'm clearly going to have to dig back into some of my textbooks to look more closely at software-defined radios, because I'm saying, but some of this stuff I'm like, okay, that's a magic word. I'm going to have to go back and teach myself about that. But it's really astounding how far electronic warfare has come since I first started serving, and we appreciate all the innovation you guys bring to the table.